Welcome to Wins and Lessons Podcast, hosted by Michael Winters, the Growth Educator. This podcast is a platform to give listeners an inside perspective on life, education, and business experiences from each guest. Thank you for tuning in. It's Wins and Lessons.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Wins and Lessons Podcast. I am your host, Mr. Michael Winters. So today we are going to follow up with part 2 of our conversation about answering the call on how to get more Black male educators involved in the field of teaching. So the first episode, part 1, was very insightful. We introduced each of our panel members, and they had opportunities to answer questions and just share their insight and wisdom about different aspects that we deal with in education. So part 2 will be the same format. We have our panelists, and then we also have our facilitator, Mr. Thomas Mayfield. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Mayfield, and we'll begin part 2. Thank you for tuning in.
All right, everybody, we are back. Glad you guys could join us for part 2. We hope you enjoyed part 1 of the Black Male Educator Series. We thank Mr. Winters so much for allowing us to come on the podcast. And I personally want to thank each and every gentleman that decided to spend time with us and share some insight with you on what it's like to be a Black male educator. As you know by now, we make up 2% of the field of education. And some of us, we didn't have a Black male educator until later in our school career. But we do know the impact and the importance of Black male educators. Now, when we look at education as a whole, we understand the big thing is pay. And we understand that educators are vastly underpaid, and we deserve a lot more for the work that we do. So the question I have for the gentleman, what are some ways or some incentives that we can get more Black men in the classroom, whether that be a way to get them more pay or something that will give them incentive to want to be in the classroom?
I'll jump in. So before I dive into that, man, I just want to say that a lot of educators already have to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet. And so when you bring that issue to young black men, I think Jonathan talked about in part 1, how, some of his friends and people that he grew up with, same age, making, almost twice as much. And you want to, enjoy life. You have a certain lifestyle that you want to live. Well, I definitely think that, and it's a bigger issue, of course, but I definitely think that some type of program or something should be put in place to allow you to earn more than just that base pay. So whatever that should look like, I'm not sure, but I do know for a fact that money is a huge, huge factor why a lot of Black men just don't even, deal with the profession of teaching at all. We talked about in part 1 how, some people look at moving into a leadership role to, earn more money, which of course that is something that comes along with it, but you still have the other responsibilities as well. So I think that teachers should have some type of option to do either some type of extra work or extra program or something that would enable them to earn more, instead of just having to, work part-time jobs here and there. It should be something within the field of education that allows them to earn more. And I think that will help, definitely increase numbers for our Black male population in educators.
Yeah, I know a lot of educators, they work jobs on the side. Most of us probably tutor or something of that nature because it's already in education. But George Stewart is, like I said in episode 1, he's doing some phenomenal things. And I think I have an idea what George is going to say, but I'll let him say it himself. George?
Well, I have a couple of ideas. I think one of the things we're talking about being Black male educators ourselves, and the impact that we have within our classrooms and beyond. So one of the things that I think would be great if there was some type of either local, statewide type of pipeline that could be created at the district or the state level that leads up to the college level, and there be some type of similar to like the program that I think is based out of South Carolina called the Call Me Mr. program, where they offer college scholarships for young Black males who want to be elementary school teachers. So I think an incentive such as that, where scholarships are offered to young Black men who want to be school teachers, would be great. I also would like to see, I think would be great, is if they would revisit the policies on housing assistance. And I say for me personally, I just recently closed on a house, thank God for that. But the process was so crazy, you know what I mean? And even with the housing program that they said I could possibly qualify for, I didn't qualify for. And so I think that we need to revisit some of those incentives, like housing programs for teachers that teach in certain particular areas and things like that. And so I think that would be something great as well. So let's revisit the policies that they say we have all of these options and things like that for teachers that teach in certain type of areas and teach certain subject areas. But when you look at it, a lot of us don't even qualify for them in some form or fashion. So I think that those policies need to be revisited. So I think that would be something great as well.
No, George said something that made me think of my college experience. Right before I was about to leave Alcorn and I was finishing up the education program, I remember they did a job fair, or a teacher fair really. And I remember a lady from Springfield, Illinois coming down and speaking with me. And she offered me a job. And she said, not only will I offer you a job, but your first 3 months rent will be paid on the school district. So it was hard for me to turn it down, because that's something that as a young man, 21, 22 years old, somebody telling you that they're going to support you financially out the gate, that sounds pretty good. So let's see what Jonathan Humphrey thinks about how can we get more Black male educators? What incentive can we offer them, or how can we get them more money?
Right. So I think the incentive has to start back in like elementary school, middle school, high school. So I think that one of the key factors is African American boys have to see and have good experiences in school. So some of us are motivated by like I didn't get a good education, so I gravitated towards that. But I also think that if you provide kids with an education that they enjoy, it's impactful, they enjoy coming to school, the idea of school is a place they actually want to be, and you can keep that consistent from elementary to middle to high school. And you combine with like what George just talked about, the Call Me Mr. program, where you have teachers that go to high schools and they actually recruit high school kids, specifically Black males, and sell them on the idea of becoming a teacher, the impact. And then also on top of that, you begin to show them different pathways into doing more than teach. So I think that, again, many times we think about education and as Black men, as most of us, we start out young, but as we matriculate through our careers, you begin to accrue a family, a wife, children, and you start to think about, how do I provide for my family? And so I think, again, as you begin, as George talked about, a pipeline. So you begin to not only show them opportunity education, but you also show them multiple pathways to, you can teach for X amount of years, but here's how you can expand that into advocacy, into nonprofit work, into school administration, school board level. And you begin to expose them to that. Like we know if we expose children to multiple or different types of jobs, it broadens their mind to think about more than doctor, lawyer, firefighter, police officer. If you expose teachers to, hey man, what is your passion? You've honed your skills as a teacher. Now you want to do more. What do you do? Because right now it's teacher, coach, assistant principal, principal, school board, and it's the same path. Everybody should go through that same funnel. When you expose people to the different things in education, and there's so many things out there, then you begin to sell people on the idea that I can do more than just teach. I can teach, but I can also go and do this. And I'm really passionate about law, so then I can do educational law. I'm really interested in counseling. Well, then you can go the route of teacher, then go to counsel. So many different things you can do within the school system and around the setting of education. But I think kids have to have a good experience in school to start with. If they don't like school, they're not going to go back to be teachers. Then if you start early recruiting them, pair them with teachers, even if they're not necessarily in the education program, community service. It used to be in high school. You used to have to go to a school and do some community service work. That's what also drew me in to want to be a teacher. So, it's some systematic things, because money is not always in our control. But if there's some things like that we can begin to set up as Black men to start going down to high schools and talking to high school kids and start educating them on the different pathways. If we make sure that the kids that we see personally enjoy school, that's one of the biggest impacts we can have, is if they look at us and say, I want to be like George, I want to be like Bobby, I want to be like Deontay. That sets the precedent right there, and as long as it continues, then you have a better chance of getting more Black males to come into the field of education.
I don't know who's going to pass a collection plate on that one, but man, you came with it that time, because I felt even inspired to go in the classroom at that point, and I've been in it going on 6 years, man. That was emotional, that was powerful, and I think we need more of that from Black men in the classroom. So let's see what Jerry has to say about what incentives can we give Black men. Is it strictly money, or is there other ways we can incentivize Black men going into education?
Yeah, and I agree. We need to pass the plate for John. I'll cash app you by $3-4. In 2007, I was recruited by the FBI here in Memphis, and when I was sitting talking with the gentleman who recruited me, I asked, "Well, why would you want someone who has no background in law enforcement? I'm probably more of a criminal. I've broke the law more times than I'm trying to enforce this thing. Like, why would you want me?" And he said, "Well, we no longer are interested in people who have criminal justice backgrounds." That's interesting. So why would you, he said, "Well, they've been preconditioned to think a certain way." That's interesting. Because the reality is, most of us, I was not an education major. I was actually headed to law school. And I was substitute teaching, which is when I met Mr. Harvey and fell in love with the kids and just never went to law school. I never took my LSAT. But I think there is an untapped resource and an opportunity to tap into those Black men who have not considered education, who are engineers, people who have gone into some science field, perhaps into law enforcement or some other area that they have, studied in college, and this is where I'm going. How can we bring them into the field? Because they don't have a conditioned way to think about education. They haven't been around people who, have started talking to them about it already. They haven't started looking at schools and talking with principals. Nobody's in their ear talking about lesson planning. They're wide open. So they're bringing a really different perspective that has not yet been tapped as a resource. And if you bring in a person who has an engineering degree, can you imagine that person teaching math at your school? Do you see what I'm telling you?
Right.
So there's a great opportunity now to incentivize it. You compensate them what they would be making as an engineer. And that's just the bottom line. You have an engineering degree. You were getting ready to go be an engineer. If you're bringing that level of knowledge and content knowledge specifically to the classroom, we should compensate you for that level of work. Now, if you're getting ready to go make $150,000 and I'm trying to get you to come teach and make 48, sounds good, I'm gonna go over here. I don't want to eat cereal for dinner, you know?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, cereal for dinner is great. I'm not knocking that. But I think there's an untapped opportunity there to begin to recruit Black men who have not considered it, who have gone into these other fields of endeavor, and bring them into the fold.
I absolutely agree with you. There are so many untapped resources we have in the Black community that I think we need to begin to tap into a little bit more at this time. Let me see some other people who would like to have a comment on what can we do to incentivize Black men to come to the classroom? Is it simply pay, or is it more or less something else we could do? Or how can we raise the pay to get Black men in education? No other comments? All right, George.
Real quick, I'll say we can raise the pay. I'm not sure how anybody else feels about this, but eliminating state testing and put that money toward paying teachers better.
I'm with you there, brother. With you there. Anybody else? Antonio, let's see what you got to say about how we can get more Black men in the classroom.
I think also not just getting them into the classroom is important, but also retaining them in the classroom is also of great importance. And I just think about my career when I was under the tutelage of Miss Ruby J. Payne, and how she really fostered an environment that cultivated me to be a master teacher, and some things that she did to really help elevate me as not just a Black male teacher, but a teacher as well. And so for me, some things that she did was, number one, she gave me autonomy. And so in that classroom, she pushed me to be a content expert. But once she felt comfortable with me, she gave me the autonomy to support my children in the way that I knew fit best for them, because I was culturally aware of what they needed, and she allowed me to have that environment. I think also another thing is, when we have these teachers in the school building, just because they're men don't mean they don't have feelings. And so we have to make these men feel valued. And so we have to support them. We have to have an opening ear to their concerns. And then we have to make them feel like they're part of the environment. And so I think that's of great importance. I think another thing is, and I think Mr. Winters kind of touched on this a little bit, is that we have to place our teachers in a position of decision-making, and so that they can develop themselves into leaders, and that they can develop themselves into thought partners in the educational process, and then be able to have an input into what's going on into the school environment, into the policies that are affecting them and the children in your school building. I think also another piece is we have to bring recognition to the profession. I remember that when I was a teacher, I was going into my last year of the classroom, and I remember winning an award called the Prestige Award. They made a big deal about it, but they really made me feel a certain way, and it really pushed me in my profession, because it made me feel like I was valued. And so by doing that, I think those are some ways that we can retain our teachers. And then I think the last piece that we've all been talking about is the organic mentoring and coaching that we have to have in the school environment. We have to support these teachers. We have to support them in a way in which they can develop themselves as professionals, to develop themselves as content knowledge experts, and to develop themselves as servant leaders. And so we have those environments, we cultivate those environments, we're gonna get the results that we're looking for. And we're gonna be able to not only just recruit our teachers, but also retain our teachers, which I think is of utmost importance.
All right, I absolutely agree. Let's hear from Drake Sanders. We haven't heard from him in a moment. Then we'll swing it over to Deontay Spann.
Yeah, I have to say, honestly, it just, not to piggyback on what everybody said, but everything that has been said is really those things. They're really the things that matter. When you look at male educators, Black male educators, and you look at why we teach is one thing. But when you look at how long we continue teaching, it's a completely whole other thing. And a lot of the times, you hear, prime example, when I was in high school, I had there was a choir director at this school, and literally we're in the middle of a festival. He up and leaves. I'm talking about literally just gone. And as students, you don't really know what's going on. You know that he left because you don't see him, but you don't know what went on. I found out he left and went to law school, like that, literally in the middle of the festival. The rest of his children are still coming to the festival, still going to support, but he's gone. And it took me, as I got older, I realized what transpired. And one thing I noticed was part of it was money, but the other part was simply just not getting that support. And after a while of feeling like I'm not getting the support I needed, why should I stay? I think that even for myself, I've only been teaching for 4 years, and I'll be honest, my first 3 years, I received support. My last year or this prior year, I didn't get as much support as I thought I needed. And I could argue that part of that I could hold myself accountable for, but I could also argue and be mindful that the person that I wanted support from also needed support. You see what I'm saying? So sometimes something as simple as a teacher working with administrators that just don't mix well, because it happens. It's just like a sport. You can be a great player and just not have the coach that you need, and that's okay. It happens. So I think that honestly, it's about financial gain in some aspects, but it's also about being around the right people. Because the right people do what? They produce good product if they're doing the right stuff. And when you mesh all those things together, I think that's what it boils down to. So, not to piggyback off of everybody else, but truthfully, financial gain is one thing to get people into the building, but also the right support system and the right people in the right spots. When you add all those things, people will automatically stay. Something as simple as hearing God will cover you will keep you through the next week. You can have a completely old bad week and say, look, God's going to cover you. We're going to be all right. We're going to ride this out. And boom, that teacher has stayed 3 years later. So I think that's what it is, man.
We hear the quote all the time, all smart people aren't leaders and all leaders aren't smart people. So just because we have somebody that's smart doesn't necessarily know how to lead or give support to other people or actually display the knowledge. We know a lot of educators that have the content knowledge, but they can't necessarily teach it to other people to where they understand it. And Mr. Sanders talked about sometimes being a great player, but not having the right coach. Well, we're going to swing it over to a star player in his district, Deontay Spann, who came out the gate out of college winning awards.
So just like many on the panel has mentioned a lot of great points, I'm just going to piggyback and just add to what I wrote down. For one, having higher salaries in teacher in education period needs to be a focal point. Secondly, I also wrote down that we first have to close the achievement gap of graduating our high school students, our African-American male students, in order to even get them to pursuing an education degree. I think Mr. Harvey mentioned that we've got to gain back the respect and recognition for the profession. Another thing I also wrote down, we have to build a support system. We've got to have that support system at all levels. That's public school level and even at the collegiate level until we get into the profession. Also, some recommendations for colleges of education will be, like many of you have mentioned, is partnering with primary and secondary schools to establish those initiatives that provide African-American male role models in education. And then another recommendation for colleges of education will be to incorporate lessons on stereotyping African-American male students as a part of the teacher education curriculum at the collegiate level, of course. And then my last point will be for colleges, or I guess through their partnership, setting up programs for those students that have not decided what they want to major at the collegiate level, so that they can, I guess, be pushed in a sense to pursue education as a whole. So that's all I have.
All right, so we have two more brothers that have not spoken, and Jonathan wants to have a summation. So we're going to swing it over to Woodrow Price. Bobby Banks will be immediately after him, and then Jonathan will finish this question off.
All right. One way I feel that we can attract more Black males into education, start with them in high school. I know a lot of high schools have dual enrollment programs that attract different teams to different fields, but I don't think I can recall one trying to attract children to go into education, particularly Black males. The only program I'm aware of, they had a program in Alcorn about 2 years ago that was trying to attract Black males in the area to go into education. They also paid for some of their college courses while they were in high school, but I'm not sure of how many actually went into the field after they graduated. So my biggest push would be to attract those males while they're in high school and show them the positive aspects of going into education.
I completely agree with you. Let's see what Bobby Banks has to say on this topic. How can we get more Black men in education or simply to the classroom?
I remember sitting at the table with the president of Alcorn State University at the time, what Woodrow is talking about, when they first implemented that program. And my idea was, to create a school similar to the Mississippi School of Math and Science and Mississippi School of Arts, to house students on a campus possibly, to, make sure that they have those foundational aspects of education. But yes, I feel like building relationships is one of the main pieces of making sure that we change the narrative. We want to make sure that we build those relationships. But the other thing is to speak on what George talked about earlier. I think that when we get that loan forgiveness, if we get our loans forgive, and if that's, kind of communicated, or even if we get those scholarships, I feel like, that a lot of Black males will pursue the lenses of education.
All right, I agree with you there. Let's see, we'll have an altar call right now. We bring Jonathan back up to the mic.
I just got two things to say. One, in case there's a legislator listening or somebody that can cut a check, teachers should make $80,000 out the gate. And high-level teachers, effective teachers, sustained over time should make six figures. I think that's just needs to be, if you want to attract the best people and you want to keep the best people, then there shouldn't be a pay gap between the administrator and a highly effective teacher. It should be the same, and I think are close to. So I think you raise the baseline at $80K, which means that then the requirement for you being an educator raises the bar for who comes in. It attracts high-level people, but also raises the bar for who comes in. And also, coming in, if I'm highly effective over a course of X amount of years, I don't have to seek promotion to make the money I want to make. I can stay right where I am. I can hone my craft, and I can teach my children, and I can make $100,000 or $95,000 or whatever. That right there will increase it. The other thing I want to add in there, just to plug, is that University of Memphis has a River City project along with Shelby County Schools, which has Secure the Chalk. That is a program that actually seeks to recruit high school Black males into education. They will pay tuition, University of Memphis. It's a great program. So anybody out there that has a teenage son or you got a young son and you're wanting to get them education or thinking about it, River City Project, which is at University of Memphis, Secure the Chalk, Shelby County Schools, is a program specifically for Black male educators or potential Black male educators that can get their tuition paid and guarantee them a job in Shelby County upon graduation, if I'm not mistaken. Hope I'm saying that right. But definitely check on those two things. Secure the Chalk, River City Project. That's a partnership between Shelby County Schools, University of Memphis. So just want to put that out there.
Completely. Thank you for the information. Before we get to George and wrap this question up, Jerry dropped something in the chat. And he said, if you average 25 kids per class, and I'll even knock the number down. If you average 25 kids per class and at $2,000 per kid, that's $50,000 a year. And you have a lot of educators in America that don't make $50,000 a year. So if you got 25, and let's say you have high school where you got 5-6 classes a day, and I mean, I think people don't understand what teachers go through on a daily basis and what we have to deal with and how we have to manage. So I'm gonna let George finish it off and we'll go into the wrap up.
I was just gonna say back to my point, and my administrative brothers help me out. If you eliminate the state testing, the money that's put towards state testing, the millions of dollars that's put into state testing, eliminate that, focus on district level benchmark, and put that money toward teacher salaries, I think it could work. But again, I'm not an administrator, but my administrative brothers can help me out on that. But that's what I'm thinking. Eliminate that test.
Jonathan, you want to respond?
Sure, I will. I agree with you on that. I think the other issue, man, as educators, we have to have a bigger voice, man. This is a societal issue. Society puts money in what they value, right? And let's just call it what it is. You know, other industries that are non-essential make 10 times what teachers make and then some, right? So it's really also about us speaking up for ourselves as educators and helping people to understand how important education is. And that's been a problem in this country, man, as long as I've been in education. And it's more so a shift in society. This pandemic has caused people to begin to think more about education, and it's caused parents to begin to realize how important teachers are, how hard the job is, because they've been charged with educating their own children. And many parents I spoke with, including myself as a parent, have struggled with working and teaching my child or teaching their child. And even those that aren't working and still trying to teach a child, are struggling with just a regular day, scheduling a day of instruction. So I think the ear is there, the lens is there. The sad part about this would be for us to come out of this pandemic and go back to business as usual. That education is not a priority. Again, when you hear about teacher raises, people sometimes complain about teachers getting a raise. And that happens. People get upset about it, which I don't understand it. But again, I think it's part of teacher unions, it's part of administrators, it's part of teachers. It's up to us to speak up for ourselves and say that this is important work. And people are beginning to see now, if teachers across the country said, I'm not teaching in these conditions anymore, right? Our whole country would completely shut down. It would stop, right? That's how important education is, not just because it's smart for your kids to go while you work, but again, because if your child is not educated, remember, back in slavery times, they made sure African Americans or slaves could not read. That was important, right? That's important. We're in charge of making sure children can read, do math, learn street skills, learn formal skills, learn the middle class societal norms. We teach all of those things and then some. If we were to shut this thing down, society comes to a halt. Right? So what I'm saying is we hold the power. It's just that we oftentimes are so bogged down with this hard work that we do because it's about children that we don't often advocate for ourselves that teachers need to be paid more. More money should be put into education. And on top of that, the accountability has to be there so that money is spent in the right direction. But I think we all know that in order for us to be successful, more money has to be put in education, but the people in charge of the money have to be accountable to make sure the money goes where it should go. So I agree, state testing, yeah, that's one way we can get more money in, but we definitely have to speak up for ourselves because money's out there. But those that have the money choose not to give it sometimes. And I think that's also a travesty.
And I think one thing that we all know about state testing that it does not measure what they think it measures. I know some of us probably didn't have the highest SAT scores. We probably didn't have the highest ACT scores. But look at how many people we impact. I know one guy in particular, my cousin, he didn't have the highest ACT score, but he became a Rhodes Scholar, and he's currently at Harvard University. So I think when we look at ACT scores, state testing, all of those things, I think to a fault, they are overrated in the way they measure our kids. All right, let's move on to the final question of part 2. So we talked about a lot of things. We talked about how we can impact people. We talked about the problems with being a Black male educator. We talked about so many things that impact so many people. So the final thing I have for you is your final thoughts, and what advice would you give to a young man looking to go into education, or somebody who's struggling in education and may be considering getting out? So do you have any advice for a young Black man who may want to go into education, who you probably could persuade to go into education, or somebody struggling who thinking, this ain't for me? What's your price?
As a Black male that grew up in a single parent home, I like to encourage those who are thinking about going into the field of education to understand that they matter. You actually matter. We have a lot of boys that are struggling in our schools, as we know that even though 2% of the teacher population are African American males, our African American children make up over 50% of public schools. So I would like to encourage them to know their worth, and they matter, and they can make a difference.
Absolutely, Woodrow. Great job. Great job. Deontay Spann, what advice would you have for a young man wanting to go into education, or one that may be struggling and may want to leave the classroom?
Really good question. I would say know your worth. Know that you are valued, and that many of our African American children, they need you. Don't give up. We were born to do this. We were born to be strong and show love and do all those things that society says, hey, a male, or quite frankly, see males as not being able to do or whatever. So yeah, that's all I have as right now. I might think of something later.
Well, the great thing about it, Deontay, you are still growing. Who knows what information you may have next year, or 5-10 years from now. But the great thing about it, being a young Black male educator, every year you grow and you learn something else. And I think that's critical. You've had success in your career, and I am extremely proud of you and proud to call myself your classmate. So I thank you for being on this call, sharing your knowledge, and we just thank you.
Thank you.
Let's swing it over to Michael Winters.
Yeah, so for that educator who's considering quitting or walking away from it, I would just really encourage them to think about what lesson you want to teach your scholars right now. I think it's very important to be very transparent with your scholars. So and they're going to know, kids are smart. They know when you're struggling. They know when you're not feeling it. And they know when you're not into it. So just encourage them, okay, you struggling right now. You feel like that this not working out for you. Let this be an opportunity for you to teach your scholars how to persevere, how to be resilient. At this point, if you're thinking about quitting, I'm pretty sure that you're having a lot of classroom management issues, and that's okay. It's only room to go up. So, be determined to turn it around And I think that's a critical way to gain the respect of those students when they actually can see your growth. Not only will you gain their respect, but you will also instill in them a sense of efficacy. Like, if my teacher can do this, I seen my teacher, the progress they made. Oh, I know I can, do better. I know there's nothing that I can't do just by simply watching how they navigated through their struggles. But again, in order to do that, that person has to be open. Like Jonathan was sharing in part one, being open to receiving that feedback, to receiving that support. So in order for that type of change to happen, they had to be willing to actually stay and do the inner work, and then everything else will fall in place.
Absolutely. Always need encouragement. No matter what you've accomplished, you always need somebody in your corner. So, let's see what Bobby Banks has to say about some advice he may have for a young person wanting to go into education, a teacher that's struggling, or any final words that you may have.
I'll just say, like the rest of the brothers have said, to never give up. Of course, you have to remember your purpose, the reason why you actually entered the field of education. Your students actually need you. There are kids that are living in single parent homes, and some of them are even growing themselves up. And so we have to understand that sometimes we are all that they have, and we're all that they look toward. And so we have to be that all for them, regardless of what we're going through. We have to put ourselves aside and think about our students. I also say, find a mentor. Seek a person that'll hold you accountable, a person that'll keep you on track, that'll keep checking on you. I can remember when I called Michael. I called him, and we had several discussions about him up there and me down in Claiborne County, and so we kept holding each other accountable. Another thing is to just keep your students at the center of every decision, regardless of what it is. Understand your purpose. Just understand why you're actually in the field of education. And so I think that's the goal of the GOLD and the GOAL, the goal of what we're actually doing.
I absolutely agree with you. If you're an educator and you just know your heart is not in it, nobody will benefit from that. You won't benefit from it. Your students won't benefit from it. Your administration, nobody will benefit from it if you're not being sincere in what you're doing. And that's for people that want to go in education. You have to be 100% sincere, and you have to want to make a difference in young people's lives. Let's see what George Stewart thinks about his final words or just advice to young Black men.
I'm sorry. I was on mute. But what I was saying was sometimes change is good. And so I think a lot of times, or sometimes, a brother may be wanting to give up or looking to quit. He may be out of position. So I would say sometimes to think about possibly changing or entertaining the thought of changing your grade level or your subject area. And so I know, like me personally, I started out at the high school level. That was my first assignment in education. And then I eventually found myself in the elementary school. But the way my personality is set up, and I guess the way I kind of run things, elementary wasn't a good fit for me. And so I felt the need to go back up to a grade level where I felt was more of a fit for me. So I would just say, if you're in the classroom, you're thinking about giving up or quitting, entertain the idea of just trying a different grade level or another subject area.
George also brings up a valid point. Sometimes changing schools can mean a big thing for you. It can rejuvenate you. It can give you a different life. Changing school districts can rejuvenate you to a point to where you want to keep going forward. A lot of people think that money is such an important factor in life. Not going to say it isn't, but leadership is what you really need. I don't care if you go to work, to church, wherever you go, leadership is going to give the effect that's going to display in everybody in that area. And I say that to swing it over to Antonio Harvey.
All right. So as a school building leader, I have encountered this scenario a few times, and I have to acknowledge that teaching is a tough profession. It's a job that requires a lot from individuals who step into those positions. And so when I have talked to those individuals, I've always talked to them from a positive mindset of saying, hey, you a winner. And that sometimes winners do quit, but winners quit things at the right times. And so with that being said, it doesn't mean that you have to quit the profession. It doesn't mean that you have to quit the students, but it may mean it's an opportunity for you to do some things that may be differently that can support you in the profession. So it may mean you are quitting doing some of the things that you were stressing you out. Go in, prepare yourself a little bit more in the morning time, come in a few minutes earlier or stay a few minutes later to get those lesson plans out of the way so that you won't go home and be bogged down with that kind of work. Find ways to organize yourself better. And so those are some things that I would encourage young people to do, young men to do is, don't give up on the profession because the profession needs you. We're only 2%. And so we need everybody that's in the profession who had a heart to come in and to stay in it. And so as a leader, we have to find ways to support those individuals and have those conversations to find out what their needs are and then to help them to continue to be winners. And so that's what I would encourage people to do in those situations. You don't have to quit the profession, but you may need to quit some things that will cause you to have those difficulties that hindered you from being as successful as you want to be or discouraged you from making the step to go to a higher level. So that's my point on it.
Absolutely. Let's swing it over to Jerry Sanders, who I'm sure has some pretty interesting thoughts and advice for young Black men.
I'll be brief and just say that, at this juncture in your life, if you're considering that means that there's something about it that appeals to you, and be honest with yourself about what it is that appeals to you. And if this is the best way for you to accomplish what it is that you've identified, because it may be that you say, I love working with kids. That's great. And this may not be the avenue that you need to take or the medium to go about it. And so I think that's one. And then two is, I think and this has been said several times, find someone who's doing it already, who can guide you and lead you and mentor you through this process. It's beneficial in ways that, I could have imagined for the people I've been blessed to work with and the people who've worked with me early on in my career, like Mr. Harvey, who I'll always, got lots of love for, who used to pull me in and be like, nah, this is not what you do. This is how you do it. So yeah, find good mentors and figure out what exactly it is that you're seeking and make sure that this is the right path that you want to commit to.
Absolutely. We thank you. And you shared so much knowledge with us tonight, man. I hope all of us can stay connected. We are, a dime a dozen. So we all have a special trait about us that makes us Black male educators. So we thank you so much for joining in, and God bless you, and hope everything goes well. If we do have an in-school year. So at the time we were recording this, nobody knows what's going to happen, but we thank you for your knowledge. Let's swing it over to Drake Sanders. We're going to leave Jonathan for last just to see what he's going to share with us before we finish this podcast.
Man, I have to say, honestly, when I really think about the question that was asked, sometimes it's something as simple as going back to why you first started. Sometimes it's something as simple as the Dennis Rodman situation. Like, man, I need some time off. All of those things are just a perspective of who you are as a person. Sometimes for teachers, it's something as simple as I need to enroll back into school. I always think about the fact that when you get into the profession, you get into it because you believe in that, one, you can make a change, two, that this is what's for you, and three, that God is going to have his hand on you. All of those things are correct. It's going to happen. But even more than that, I think it goes back to, okay, I'm in this now, and I got to figure out where am I mentally that's going to help me continue to be effective for everybody that I touch. And I'll be honest, sometimes it might just be, look, I need to go talk to somebody. I need to confide in somebody about what's going on. I need to go talk to a therapist about this and figure out, okay, this is where I am. This is where I want to be. I need to figure out how to keep this in one spot and then continue doing this. So I think it's a lot of situations, but I think it all goes back to your mental space and why did you start this? Because sometimes what you started doing is great, but that time may be up. And you may have to come back into education in a different role because the role that you're in now, you've outgrown it, and that's okay. So, man, I think it's a lot of different ways, but I think those are the main two. Figure out your mental space and then figure out why did I start this. And I think, God will lead you from that point.
I completely agree with you. Sometimes we may run our course of the school in the school district, or sometimes it was only for a season. It was a blessing to help certain young people, but it may not be our long-term goal, and it may not be what's successful for our lives long-term. Because like I said earlier, if you're not giving your all to yourself, to your students, to your school, nobody is going to benefit from it. So you need to make sure mentally that you are locked in whenever you go to work. Did we hear from Woodrow Price?
You did?
Okay. Woodrow, I just want to thank you, man. I didn't get a chance to thank you earlier. You do so much great work in the community. We thank you for joining this call, and every award that you've ever received, you are absolutely worthy of it. You have a remarkable story about your own education career, and we just thank you for joining this call tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Last but certainly not least, we're going to swing it to Jonathan Humphreys to finish it off for us, and we'll be getting ready to finish up, and let's see what Jonathan will bless us with right now.
All right. Well, thank you again. I appreciate this opportunity just to share and talk with other Black male educators. Man, it's definitely a blessing to see all of you that are here now, and all of those that were on here earlier. I want a special thanks to Antonio Harvey, Jerry Sanders, as everyone's kind of talked about. Those are the two people that mentor me, and I can go to, and I know they'll give me honest feedback. They'll tell me if I'm right, if I'm wrong. They'll give me different perspectives. They'll challenge me. And so what I'll say about someone that's looking to come into it is that, I'm just gonna keep it personal. I have a son. He's in 4th grade. Man, my son needs you. And it's, I can't say enough, man. My son, he goes to school with me, so I'm the principal there. But he needs to see teachers that look like him inside of school, not just my particular school, but across the city, across the country. Kids of all different colors. Our schools need to represent what our kids, what our school looks like. And what I mean by that is schools should be diverse in all aspects. There should be Black, white, Hispanic, schools need to be a melting pot, because the world that's what we want the world to look like. But speaking to my Black male educators out there that's looking to come in, man, what I can tell you is the journey is worth it. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. There are going to be days you're going to want to quit. There are going to be times you're going to question yourself and are you effective? You're going to question yourself about all the kids listening to you. But I promise if you stay in long enough, and when I say long enough, I don't mean 15, 20 years. I mean a couple of years, you'll see the kids come back year after year to hug you, to fist bump you, to tell you you're my favorite teacher. You'll see parents out in public. They'll say, my kid still talks about you. You're their favorite teacher. They always still refer back. I mean, those things just keep happening. And what I always tell people is that as teachers, sometimes we're narcissistic because we want to see the change when we have the child. We want to see the change happen right before our eyes. But kids are like a garden. Each child is a seed, and we water them along the journey. Sometimes in the journey we actually see the bloom, but sometimes the seed is just deeper in the ground, and we just have to keep watering. Our responsibility is to water it. When it blooms, we'll see it because they'll come back because the impact that we had was long lasting. And so I think that's what I'll say to somebody that may be looking into community education, is that the reward may not be immediate. But I tell you, it's well worth it in the long run when you see the impact you've had on kids, first-generation college students that come back and say, I went to college because you inspired me. When you see that they're in their careers, they're thriving. Even when you see that child that came to you and they weren't doing well, they finished with you and they went to next grade, now they're doing well, that makes a difference. And to the gentleman or the young man that may be thinking about quitting, what I tell you is, what everybody else said is absolutely true. Another piece is lean into being uncomfortable, because growth is not a comfortable process. When you work out, it hurts. It's painful. But when you get chiseled and you go to the beach, it's well worth it. So I just say lean into being uncomfortable, lean into the strain, and lean into being stretched so that when you finally come out and you built your muscles up, you can show off everything that you've learned and everything you've done, and it will produce whatever pathway that you're seeking. You'll get those results. So lean into that. Understand it's not going to be a comfortable process, but know that on the other side of hard work is always great gain.
Jonathan, I just want to say this, man. You have been a blessing to me. Tonight, you shared so much knowledge with me, and I hope the people listening and the guys on this panel are not just listening to you, but to everybody, because we all need different perspectives on life. But man, you are an exceptional gentleman, and I thank you so much, man. I know I haven't had a chance to meet you yet. The great thing about it, my brother does live in Memphis, so when I come up, if the pandemic is over, I'm gonna start hitting y'all up, man. We're gonna have to get together or something. So I've completely enjoyed myself tonight, from start to finish. I hope that the people listening and the people on this panel have learned as much as I have. I thank first and foremost Michael Winters for allowing us to come on this podcast. And like I said, life is about wins and lessons. And being a teacher, you're going to have some wins. You're going to have some kids that are going to tell you, man, I thank you. I appreciate you. I look up to you. You don't know how you've impacted my life. But sometimes you're going to have some classes that are not going to go as well. You're going to have some lesson plans that you're going to struggle with. You're going to have some students you're going to struggle with. But that's life. Teaching is no different from being a black man in America. It's always going to be a struggle. So I thank y'all for allowing me to be your host. Thank y'all for me to spend time with you guys. From the bottom of my heart, I love y'all and I appreciate y'all.
Yes, sir, man. Excellent job tonight. Thank you again, gentlemen, for the time that you all have invested to make this conversation even possible. So I can't tell you, how much that means to me. And again, Thomas, man, thank you for doing such a wonderful job, hosting and facilitating the conversation. So again, kudos to you. I look forward to our next meeting, our next gathering. But gentlemen, y'all stay safe and be blessed.
This has been another episode of Wins and Lessons. Be sure to download Wins and Lessons podcast from Apple Podcast and Spotify. Subscribe to the Growth Educator channel on YouTube for the videos and follow at Wins and Lessons Podcast and at the Growth Educator on Instagram. Remember these 3 things: we live, we love, we learn.